They say the fire that burned Riverside Plantation in 1846 took everything with it, the house, the ledgers, and the secrets buried deep in Virginia soil. But the truth didn't burn that night. It lived on inside one man who had seen too much, who had carried silence like a wound for 37 years. His name was Samuel Pritchard. And before he died, he decided to speak. Part 1: The Ledger of Souls. My name is Samuel Pritchard, and for 37 years, I belong to another man. I've spent more than half my life in silence, carrying memories that never stopped bleeding inside me. But before I leave this world, I must speak of what I witnessed at Riverside Plantation, in Virginia, between 1809 and 1846. What happened there wasn't just cruelty. It wasn't the whip, the hunger, or the endless labor that defined most of the South in those years. What I saw went far beyond that. It was something that reached into the very soul of suffering, something that changed the way I understood what it meant to be human. The official records claim Riverside burned down in 1846. They say it was an accident. What those records don't say is why 17 slaves disappeared in 1 month, or why the Hargrove family buried 3 generations in unmarked graves on the eastern ridge behind the house. I was there. I saw what they did. And I saw what it cost them. Before I continue, you need to understand something. There are those who witness history, and those who are forced to live inside its darkness. I was both. If you're hearing this, leave a comment telling me where you're from, north or south, city or country. This story belongs to all of us. And if you believe the past should never be buried, then subscribe. The dead deserve their testimony. It all began long before I understood what I was seeing, with a promise made between desperate men, in a year when cotton prices fell and pride became more valuable than gold. I was born in 1809, the same year Thomas Hargrove bought 200 acres of land by the James River, 20 miles south of Richmond. My mother, Ruth, and I were sold with the land, like the mules, like the barns, like the very soil. We were 15 souls in total. Riverside wasn't the largest plantation in Chesterfield County, but Thomas dreamed of being more than a farmer. He wanted to be a gentleman. He was tall, with narrow shoulders and pale eyes that never quite met yours. His wife, Catherine Hargrove, came from Richmond money. Her father made his fortune in tobacco, then lost most of it when the land turned sour. She brought money to Thomas, but not enough to fill his hunger for respect. The main house stood on a hill, white columns pretending to be grander than they were. Behind it stretched our quarters, 12 cabins, each holding 4 to 8 of us, depending on the season. From where we lived, you could see the big house through the trees, always watching us, even when it seemed quiet. When I was 7, I began to understand that something at Riverside was wrong. It wasn't just the hard labor, we all knew about pain and exhaustion. It was the watching. Thomas watched us constantly. He carried a leather journal everywhere, scribbling notes even while we worked. Later, I learned those journals weren't about crops or numbers. They were about us, our habits, our fears, our breaking points. He was studying us like we were experiments. My mother worked as the cook in the big house. My father, Jacob, was a field hand, though Thomas never allowed the word family. I had 2 sisters, Ruth, 9, and little Mary, barely 3. We lived closest to the main house, which meant my mother could be called at any hour, and often was. There were others too: Daniel, who said he remembered Africa, Esther and Benjamin, sold together from North Carolina, Sarah and her daughter Grace, who helped my mother in the kitchen, and Moses, Isaac, and Elijah, who worked the fields. And then there was Augustus. He was different, educated, dangerous. Thomas had bought him at auction in Richmond, paying a sum that made other plantation owners laugh. Augustus could read and write, taught by the children of his previous master before that family fell into debt. Thomas wanted him for that skill. Augustus became the house servant, keeping records, managing supplies, and teaching Thomas's son, young Richard Hargrove, his letters. The others didn't know how to feel about him. He wore better clothes, ate better food, but was still bound by chains we all shared. Then came the year 1816. I remember it as the year the watching turned to something else. Thomas had lost money on a cotton gin that didn't work. Creditors were closing in. His temper grew short. Catherine's voice grew sharp. The nights filled with whispers and the sound of scratching pencil on paper. That September, Elijah disappeared. He was quiet, steady, no trouble. Born in South Carolina, sold north when his owner died. He never spoke much about his past. Only once I heard him tell Moses he had a wife down south who'd been sold when she was pregnant. One morning, Elijah wasn't at roll call. No one dared to be late. The punishment was too harsh. Thomas sent men to his cabin. His shirt was folded on his bed. His wooden carving of a bird sat unfinished. But Elijah was gone. For 2 days, we searched the barns, the riverbank, the woods. Then, 3 days later, someone found his shirt floating in the river. Torn, stained dark. That evening, Thomas gathered us and held it up. Elijah tried to run, he said coldly. The river took him. Let this be a lesson. But I saw his hands shaking. I saw the way he looked toward the eastern ridge, where the family cemetery stood behind a wrought iron fence. That night, my mother prayed differently, not for deliverance, but for protection. 2 weeks later, little Thomas, one of the young field hands, doubled over in pain and died by evening. The doctor said it was bowel inflammation. We buried him under the willow trees, and that night Thomas wrote furiously in his journal. That was the first time I noticed the pattern. Every time someone died or vanished, Thomas filled pages in his journal and locked himself away with Augustus. I didn't understand what he was writing about. Not yet, but I would learn soon enough. If you're still listening, leave a comment and tell me what you think Thomas was studying in that journal. Because what began as a record of labor soon became a ledger of souls, and the price of knowledge at Riverside Plantation was paid in human lives. To be continued in Part 2. Call to action. If you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, hit like, share this video, and subscribe. The dead deserve to be remembered. Would you like me to continue writing Part 2 about the next phase of Samuel's discovery, what Thomas and Augustus were secretly experimenting with at Riverside? Hook. They called it science. They called it progress. But what they built at Riverside Plantation was something far darker, a study in how much a soul could endure before it broke. The ledgers didn't just track cotton and bodies. They measured grief, obedience, and despair like they were numbers on a page. And somewhere in those pages, my sister's name disappeared. Part 2: The Experiments of Riverside. By the time I was 14, I had begun reading the mind of my owner laid bare on paper. Thomas Hargrove's journals weren't plantation records. They were experiments in human endurance. He documented everything: how long a man could work in August heat before collapsing, how grief changed a mother's eyes after losing a child, which punishments broke the will, and which only fed quiet rebellion. He measured despair the way other men measured rainfall. He called it data. I was too young to understand all of it, but I understood enough to feel the sickness behind his words. Every entry was a test. Every test was a life. Sometimes, while copying his notes, I would glance at Augustus. His hand would stop mid-sentence, and something crossed his face. Not anger, not sorrow, but something made of both. He thinks we're mathematics, Augustus whispered once. He believes if he can find the right formula, he can make us profitable and keep us from running. He doesn't understand. We're not numbers. We're testimonies waiting to be given. In 1823, Thomas returned from Richmond with a man named Drive. Silas Winthrop. The doctor was thin and severe, with wire-rimmed glasses and a black medical bag that seemed to follow him like a shadow. He stayed for 3 weeks. He didn't treat anyone. He examined us. Every one of us. He measured our skulls with cold calipers. He pinched our skin, tapped our knees, made us stand, kneel, and hold tools until our hands trembled. He asked about our parents, our health, even our dreams. And all the while, Thomas stood beside him, making notes. Always making notes. They're trying to prove something, Augustus said quietly one evening as we filed papers in the study. There's a debate in the medical societies, whether we're fully human or some in-between species. Winthrop is gathering proof. Proof of what? I asked. That we don't feel pain like they do, he said. That our bodies are built for labor, like mules. That owning us isn't sin, it's science. A few nights later, Augustus showed me a letter hidden in Thomas's desk. It was from Dr. Winthrop himself. He praised Thomas's meticulous documentation of Negro physiology and temperament, and urged him to continue his experiments on stress thresholds and recovery patterns. That letter was dated May 15, 1823. 3 months later, my sister Ruth vanished. She was 16, bright, beautiful, and full of song. She could turn any tune into a hymn of hope. On a Sunday afternoon, our one day of partial rest, she walked toward the river with a basket to gather blackberries. She never came back. When sunset came and Ruth hadn't returned, my mother's mask, the calm she'd worn for 17 years, shattered. She begged Thomas for help. He organized a search, but his voice was flat, as though he already knew what we would find. We found her basket overturned on the riverbank. Blackberries spilled across the mud. Footprints led to the water's edge, hers, and others. Men's boots. More than one pair. Thomas stood there, staring at the river. "The current is strong," he said. "It must have taken her." The same words he had used when Elijah disappeared 7 years earlier. But Ruth could swim. We all could. And I had seen the prints. She had been standing still, not running. My mother aged 10 years in a week. She stopped singing, stopped speaking except when forced to. At night, she cried with a sound that wasn't human, something torn and hollow. My father, Jacob, started asking questions. 2 weeks later, Thomas announced that Jacob was being sold to a plantation in Georgia. He said my father had become disruptive. I never saw him again. This is what history doesn't tell you, that resistance was punished through erasure. That even asking questions could destroy everything you loved. Thomas's journals from that year became even colder. He wrote about my mother like she was livestock. Subject displays diminished productivity following loss of offspring. Recovery time, estimated at 4 to 6 weeks. Emotional attachment creates operational vulnerability. Augustus showed me those words. "They're building a science of us," he said. "A manual for how to own human beings more efficiently." The thought made me sick. But he was right. Riverside had become a laboratory. When I was 17, Catherine Hargrove, Thomas's wife, fell ill. The doctors from Richmond couldn't name her sickness. She grew weak, her skin turning yellow. Thomas spent a fortune on tonics, powders, and prayers. Nothing worked. She died one morning in the spring of 1826, as apple blossoms fell like snow over the fields. Thomas locked himself in his study for 3 days. When he came out, his eyes looked hollow, not with grief, but with resolve. Like a man who had made a terrible bargain and decided to live with it. His son Richard, now 18, took over some duties. He wasn't cruel, only detached. The journals stopped for a time. The watching faded. For 2 years, Riverside was almost normal. We worked, we slept, we endured, but I had learned by then, calm at Riverside was never peace. It was only the breath before the next experiment. During those 2 quiet years, I worked closely with Augustus. We kept the books, managed supplies, and handled correspondence. Augustus encouraged me to read Thomas's library, volumes on agriculture, medicine, and the so-called science of human varieties. Those books pretended to explain who we were, written by men who had never once felt a chain. Then I found the letters. Hidden among plantation records were envelopes from other landowners across the South. Thomas was corresponding with them, sharing his findings, comparing results. There was one letter from a man named Harrison in South Carolina. His handwriting was neat, his words colder than winter. The occasional unexplained disappearance, he wrote, creates useful fear. Not panic, but a quiet dread that ensures obedience. Let them wonder. The uncertainty is more effective than any punishment. Thomas had underlined that sentence 3 times. I understood then that the missing, Elijah, Ruth, maybe others, were not accidents. They were part of the experiment. In 1828, when I was 19, Thomas and Richard went to Richmond on business. Augustus came to me late one night, his face pale in the candlelight. "You need to know where she is," he said. He meant Ruth. That was the first time I realized she might still be somewhere on that land, Somewhere hidden, somewhere Thomas had buried more than his guilt. If you believe what's buried never truly stays silent, hit like and tell me what you think happened to Ruth. Because in the next part, I'll tell you what Augustus showed me that night, and why the river behind Riverside still runs red when the moon is full. To be continued in part 3. Call to action. If you believe the truth of the past must be spoken, like, share, and subscribe. The dead are still waiting to be heard. Hook. The night before Thomas Hargrove called us into his study, the air at Riverside carried a strange silence, the kind that comes before a storm. I didn't yet know that by morning, the truth Augustus had spent 20 years protecting would burn before my eyes, and my own soul would be tested in ways I never imagined. Part 3. The Ledger of Fire. I never discovered how Thomas found out, whether one of the servants betrayed us or he'd set some trap and we walked right into it. But 3 days after Augustus showed me the graves, he summoned us both to his study. The room was heavy with quiet. Thomas sat behind his mahogany desk, his son Richard standing beside him like a shadow. On the desk lay the papers, Augustus's hidden records, the secret ledger he had guarded with his life. Every page held 20 years of names, dates, causes, and quiet suffering. Every note was a story of death at Riverside Plantation. Thomas spoke calmly, almost politely. Augustus, he said, you've been keeping unauthorized records. Augustus stood tall, his voice steady. Yes, sir. Thomas leaned back in his chair. You do understand that literacy in a slave is illegal in Virginia? That keeping such records is considered rebellion? Yes, sir. Thomas picked up one of the sheets, reading it as if it were a curiosity. Remarkably detailed work. You've written every death on this property, every detail, even your thoughts about why it happened. He looked up. You've written a criminal indictment against me. I've written the truth, Augustus said quietly. The silence that followed stretched thin, like a wire ready to snap. I braced myself, expecting Thomas's rage. But instead, he smiled, a small, cold smile that chilled the room. The truth, he said slowly. Yes. But it changes nothing. You could publish these words in every paper in Virginia and it would still mean nothing. You are property, Augustus. Your truth has no voice. He gathered the papers into a neat pile, and without a flicker of emotion, he fed them one by one into the fireplace. The flames caught quickly, devouring 20 years of testimony in seconds. The crackling sound was the sound of lives erased, the sound of power reminding us it could burn anything it wished. When the last page turned to ash, Thomas turned back to Augustus. However, he said, you've made a mistake. Not a legal one, a practical one. You've started to believe you're something more than what you are. He stood and walked toward us. His boots made a slow rhythm against the wooden floor. You've begun to see yourself as a witness. You are not. You are my property, Augustus. You exist to serve my purpose. Then he looked at me. Samuel, you've been learning from Augustus, haven't you? Did you help him with these records? Every instinct screamed for me to lie. But I thought of Augustus, his steady courage, his refusal to bow. I couldn't betray that. No, sir, I said. But I knew about it. Thomas studied me, eyes sharp as glass. Honesty, he murmured, making a note in his journal. Interesting. You're 20, Samuel. You have potential value. You can read and write better than Richard here, frankly. That makes you useful, but I need to know you understand your position. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Your sister Ruth understood at the end. Resistance has consequences. Your father understood, after I sold him away. So, tell me, do I need to teach you too, or have you learned from their lessons? My heart thundered. I had one breath to choose, defiance or survival. Stand with Augustus and vanish like my family, or bow my head and live long enough to carry the truth inside me. I lowered my head. I understand my position, sir. Thomas smiled. Good. He returned to his desk, his tone now businesslike. Augustus, you're to be sold. I've already arranged it with a trader in Richmond. He deals with difficult cases, men who need to be moved far enough away that their ideas die quietly. Georgia, perhaps. Maybe Alabama. Augustus didn't flinch, but I saw the tension in his hands. Samuel, Thomas continued, you'll take over his duties, managing the records, handling correspondence, assisting Richard. But understand this. Any hint of rebellion, and your mother and sister Mary will be sold instead. Do we understand each other? Yes, sir. Excellent. He nodded toward his son. Richard, take Augustus and make sure he's secured until the traitor arrives in the morning. As they led him away, Augustus turned once and met my eyes. He didn't look afraid or defeated. He looked peaceful, like a man who had finished what he came to do. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin walls seemed to close in, the air thick with smoke and memory. I thought of the graves in the clearing, 14 stones, 14 voices silenced. Now Augustus would be gone too, and with him the only written proof of what had happened at Riverside. But Thomas had underestimated us. He believed fire could erase the truth. What he didn't realize was that I had spent 2 years studying those papers. Every detail, every name, every date, burned into my mind. The ledger wasn't gone, it was alive inside me. When dawn came, I watched from a distance as the traitor arrived, a thick man named Craddock, his beard stained yellow from tobacco. He shackled Augustus without a word, loaded him into a wagon beside 2 others. As the wheels rolled down the dirt path, Augustus turned and looked back. Our eyes met one final time. He gave a single, slow nod, a silent promise that the truth would not die with him. And in that moment, I understood. I was no longer just surviving. I was remembering. And one day, the world would hear every word that Thomas Hargrove had tried to burn away. Would you like me to continue with Part 4, Augustus's disappearance and Samuel's secret resistance, in the same emotional and cinematic tone for YouTube narration? Hook. The day Augustus was sold, the sky over Riverside turned the color of ash. It wasn't just a sunrise, it felt like the plantation itself was mourning. But grief was dangerous at Riverside. Grief could be seen, and seen things could be punished. That morning, I learned to hide mine so deep it would look like obedience. Part 4, The Echo of the Ledger. When the trader's wagon disappeared down the road, silence settled over the plantation. It was the kind of silence that made you feel watched. Even the wind through the cypress trees seemed to move carefully, as if it, too, feared Thomas Hargrove. I stood near the stables, pretending to sweep, though my hands barely moved. All I could see in my mind was Augustus, his wrists in iron, his eyes steady, his nod still burning inside me. Thomas had destroyed his papers, but not his truth. It lived in me now, and that made me dangerous in ways even I didn't yet understand. Richard strutted past with his usual arrogance, his boots polished, his face proud as if he'd personally conquered something great. He paused and gave me a look. Father says you'll be taking Augustus's place, he said. Don't make his mistake. I kept my head down. Yes, sir, he smirked. Good. I'd hate to see another one of you end up in a wagon. The words hit like a slap. But I stayed quiet. Silence was survival now. That night, Thomas sent for me. His study was dimly lit, the fire casting long shadows across the room. He was writing in his journal as always, his pen scratching like a slow insect. Sit, Samuel, he said without looking up. I obeyed. He closed the book and turned to me. You're going to keep my records now. Births, deaths, crop tallies, transactions. Everything Augustus did, you'll continue. Do you understand? Yes, sir. He nodded. And you'll do it well. You've been educated more than most of your kind. Use it. But remember, knowledge can be a weapon or a leash, depending on who holds it. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. I hold it. For a moment, I felt my heart pounding so loud I was afraid he might hear it. Yes, sir, I said again, keeping my voice calm. He handed me a new ledger, its leather cover still smooth and clean. A fresh start, he said. You'll record everything properly now. Nothing unnecessary, nothing dangerous. When I took it, my hands shook slightly. The ledger felt heavier than paper should. It was like holding a curse. That night, in my cabin, I opened it. Blank pages stared back at me, white as bone. I thought about Augustus's words, his belief that truth mattered even when no one could hear it. If the old ledger had burned, maybe this new one could carry both truths, the one Thomas demanded, and the one that lived beneath it. So, in neat handwriting, I began the official entries. Harvest Report, March 1821. Cotton yield, above expectation. Then, between the lines, in smaller letters invisible at first glance, I added the truth. Death of Ruth, age 27. Cause. Punishment. Unjust. It was dangerous. But it was mine. Each night after that, I kept both ledgers, the one Thomas could see and the one hidden in the white spaces between words. The ghost ledger. The one only I could read. Weeks passed. Without Augustus, Riverside felt hollow. The field hands worked in silence. The quarters whispered his name like a prayer. But the punishments grew harsher. Thomas seemed restless, almost nervous. I began to notice something else. He'd spend hours in the old barn behind the main house, where the smell of chemicals hung heavy. No one was allowed inside. Sometimes, I'd see him leave just before dawn, his hands stained with something dark. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I waited until the house went quiet and slipped out, the moon bright enough to light my path. The barn door creaked softly as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick and wrong. Jars filled with strange liquids lined the walls, and something sharp and sour burned my nose. Then I saw the table. On it lay a small body, lifeless, pale, eyes half open. It was one of the house servant's children. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. And beside the child, in Thomas's careful handwriting, were notes about nerve response, resuscitation attempts, and failure at stage 3. I felt the room spin. This was what Augustus had been recording. Not just cruelty, but experiments. Thomas wasn't content to own people, he wanted to break the line between life and death. To play God in his own house. I backed away, heart racing, nearly tripping over a crate. Something inside rattled, and I froze. A jar tipped, its contents spilling across the dirt floor, a hand, gray and shriveled. My stomach turned as I realized it wasn't animal. I fled into the night, running until my lungs burned. When I reached the quarters, I sat in the dark, shaking. The truth was so much worse than Augustus had told me. Thomas Hargrove wasn't just cruel, he was monstrous. The next morning, Thomas called me again. His calm face told me he already knew I'd seen something. "Samuel," he said softly, "some doors are meant to stay closed. Curiosity can be fatal." He smiled faintly. "You remind me of Augustus in that way." Then he handed me a note. "You'll deliver this to Reverend Cole in town. Tell him I'll need another batch of supplies this week." I took it with trembling hands, nodding. "Yes, sir." As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. "Oh, and Samuel, if you ever find yourself tempted to investigate again, remember what we talked about. Your mother, your sister." The chill in his voice cut deeper than any whip. That night, I didn't sleep. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what he was doing. But I also knew that if I acted too soon, I'd doom my family. So, I waited. I watched. I wrote. Each night, the hidden ledger grew thicker in the spaces no one could see. And though Thomas believed he'd burned Augustus's truth to ashes, I was writing it back, word by word, memory by memory, breath by breath. The graves in the woods weren't finished yet. I could feel it. Something darker was still coming. And I would be there to witness it. Even if it meant becoming the next name on a stone. Would you like me to continue with part 5, where Samuel discovers the true extent of Thomas Hargrove's experiments and begins his secret plan to expose him, in the same haunting, cinematic style for YouTube narration? Hook. The human mind can only hold so much horror before it starts to twist. I used to believe silence could protect me at Riverside, but by the summer of 1829, silence had become another kind of death. The screams from the barn were proof that Thomas Hargrove's science had turned into something darker than madness. Part 5: The Barn of Experiments. It began with the smell. Not death exactly, but something near it, sweet and rotten at once, clinging to the air around the old barn. The field hands avoided that side of the property. Even the dogs barked and whined whenever Thomas went inside. He kept the door locked now, and only went there after midnight. I tried to focus on my duties, writing ledgers, counting crops, and pretending not to notice how many names were missing each month. But I couldn't stop remembering that child's body I'd seen in the barn, the gray hand in the jar, the careful notes about stages of failure. Thomas had stopped calling it research. He called it progress. He said to Richard one morning, while I stood quietly nearby, "Science requires sacrifice. If I can understand what sustains life, I can control it." Imagine a workforce that never tires, never weakens. Richard nodded, though his eyes looked uncertain. "Father, people talk. They say strange things happen in the night." Thomas smiled. "Let them talk. Fear keeps order." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mother's breathing was shallow beside me. She worked too hard now, her strength fading. My sister Mary was only 12, but she had already learned to keep her eyes down, her words soft. I knew that if I made one mistake, Thomas would sell them both. That was his power. His science wasn't just in bottles and ledgers. It was in the way he controlled our souls. The next evening, I was sent to deliver papers to the overseer, who kept his quarters near the barns. The sun had gone down, but lanterns burned near the stable doors. I was about to leave when I heard it, faint, muffled, but unmistakable. A voice, crying, then a low hum of something mechanical. I crept closer. Through a small gap in the barn wall, I saw Thomas bent over a table, his sleeves rolled up, his face lit by candlelight. Another man stood beside him, someone I didn't recognize at first. Then I remembered the name Augustus had once mentioned. Dr. Silas Winthrop, the one who had measured our skulls years ago. Thomas was saying, "If we can isolate what you called the endurance response, perhaps we can strengthen it. Push the limits beyond exhaustion." Winthrop adjusted his spectacles. "The challenge, as always, is that they die too soon." Thomas nodded, then turned to a figure on the table. I couldn't see clearly, but I heard the faint rattle of breath. Someone was alive in there. Someone suffering. I backed away before they could hear me. My stomach churned, and my hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the door latch. I knew then that I couldn't just survive anymore. I had to do something. For days, I watched and listened. I learned that Thomas sent shipments to Richmond every few weeks labeled medical materials. He said they were for the university. But I saw the size of those crates. Some were large enough to hold a person. I found one of the bills of sale hidden among plantation receipts. It wasn't written to the university at all, it was to a private address in Baltimore. Payment received for experimental subjects. My hands shook as I folded the paper and hid it inside my shirt. That was my first piece of proof. One evening, as the sun set red over the cotton fields, I met with Clara, one of the kitchen maids who sometimes smuggled scraps to the field hands. She was quick-minded and brave in quiet ways. I trusted her. "Clara," I whispered, "you ever wonder what happens to the people who vanish?" She looked around, then nodded. "I seen wagons leaving at night. I thought maybe they was runaways caught somewhere else." "No," I said softly. "They're leaving from here." Her face went pale. "You mean, Thomas?" "Yes. And if I don't find a way to stop him, he'll keep doing it." She gripped my hand hard. "You can't fight him, Samuel. You'll die." "Maybe," I said, "but if I stay silent, we all die slowly." That night, I wrote everything I knew into the hidden ledger. Every experiment, every disappearance, every lie Thomas told. I wrote about the crates, about Winthrop's return, about the sounds that came from the barn. My hand ached, but I didn't stop. Each word felt like a blade cutting through the dark. A few nights later, I took the biggest risk of my life. I went back to the barn. I carried no lantern, only the pale light of the moon. The door was locked, but I'd watched Thomas enough to know where he hid the key. I slipped inside, my heart hammering. The smell hit me again, stronger than before. I held my sleeve to my face and moved toward the back room. There were 3 tables now. On one lay a young man, motionless, his chest stitched crudely. On another, jars of blood lined in rows. And on the third, a small metal device wired to glass tubes that pulsed faintly with blue light. I stared, frozen. It looked like something alive, humming with a strange rhythm. Then I heard footsteps outside. I ducked behind a stack of crates as Thomas and Winthrop entered. We're close, Winthrop said. The subject lasted nearly an hour this time. Thomas sighed. Progress, then. Pain is the key, Silas. Suffering strengthens the bond between body and spirit. I can feel it. We're on the edge of unlocking the mechanism of obedience itself. I bit my lip to keep from gasping. Obedience itself. He wanted to make pain permanent. He wanted to invent a way to enslave the mind. They moved to the table, their backs to me. I saw Thomas reach for something, a vial of dark fluid, and inject it into the man's arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the body twitched, eyes opening wide. A terrible cry echoed through the barn. I stumbled back, hit a crate, and it clattered to the floor. The noise rang loud in the silence. Thomas spun around, lantern in hand. Who's there? I bolted. Out the door, into the night, running faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't look back. I could hear his voice calling my name, calm and cold. Samuel, come back. But I kept running. Through the fields, through the trees, until I collapsed near the river. The same river where Ruth's basket had been found years before. I stayed there till dawn, shaking. I knew then that there was no safety left at Riverside. Thomas would never stop. He had turned the plantation into a graveyard that still breathed. When the sun rose, I made my decision. I would finish Augustus's mission. I would carry the ledger to someone who could expose what was happening here, even if it cost me my life. The next night, I buried my copy of the ledger beneath the big oak near the quarters. If Thomas ever found me, at least the truth would live in the ground. Because the truth, I realized, was the only thing at Riverside that could not be enslaved. And soon, it would rise. Would you like me to continue with part 6, where Samuel begins his secret escape and Thomas's obsession turns into full-blown madness? Part 6. The night after the storm felt heavier than any before. The air in the old town carried the smell of wet earth and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. People had stopped gathering outside their homes. Doors were bolted, curtains were drawn. It was as if the town itself had stopped breathing. Elijah couldn't sleep. The memory of what he had seen inside the mill still burned behind his eyes, the shadowed figures moving where no man should be, the echoing whispers calling his name. He had tried to tell the sheriff, but the man had only looked at him with tired eyes and said, "Best you forget what you think you saw." But Elijah couldn't forget. That evening, he went to see old Martha Greer, the woman who had lived near the river since before anyone could remember. They called her strange, but she knew things about the land others refused to speak of. When Elijah knocked, her lantern flickered behind the window. She opened the door slowly, her eyes pale and watery, her face lit in a trembling orange glow. "I knew you'd come," she said quietly. "The mill's awake again, isn't it?" Elijah froze. "You knew." She nodded. "It never sleeps for long. Every 30 years, it starts to feed." He stepped inside. The small cabin was filled with dried herbs, animal bones, and jars of strange shapes floating in liquid. A faint humming filled the air, like the room itself was alive. "What does it feed on?" Elijah asked. Martha stared at him. "Memory, blood, fear, the souls of the ones who work it." Elijah's heart pounded. "Then why do people keep it running?" "Because the town depends on it," she whispered. "That's how it was built. The founders made a promise long ago, to give what the mill demanded in exchange for wealth and growth. That's why no one leaves this place whole." He felt sick. He remembered his father's death at the mill and how everyone said it was an accident. Now he wondered if it had been part of the price. Martha took something from a shelf, an old rusted key tied with a red ribbon. "This opens the lower gate," she said. "The heart of the mill. But be warned, boy. If you go down there, you might never return." Elijah took the key. His hands trembled, but his eyes were steady. "I have to stop it." Outside, thunder rolled again, though no storm clouds covered the sky. The air felt alive with a pulse that came from deep underground. Elijah followed it back toward the mill. The tall, broken structure loomed against the moonlight, its windows dark like hollow eyes. He entered quietly. The wood creaked under his boots. Water dripped somewhere in the dark. The air smelled like smoke and iron. He found the lower gate behind a set of heavy barrels. The key fit perfectly. When he turned it, the lock snapped open with a sound like a scream. The stairs spiraled down into the earth. He could hear machinery below, faint and slow, like a giant breathing in its sleep. He lit a lantern and descended. The deeper he went, the warmer the air became. The walls were slick with moisture, the stones pulsing faintly as if blood flowed beneath them. Then he reached a vast chamber. The heart of the mill. There were chains hanging from the ceiling. And in the center, a great wheel made not of wood, but of bone and iron. It turned slowly, each groan echoing through the chamber. Between its spokes, he could see faces pressed in the metal. Twisted, screaming faces that moved as the wheel turned. Elijah staggered back. One of the faces looked like his father. "Help me, son," it whispered. "Please." He dropped the lantern. It shattered, spilling fire across the wet ground. The flames flickered, revealing the truth. Hundreds of faces, all merged into the machinery, all silently begging for release. Then he heard the footsteps. Heavy, slow, coming from the shadows. A tall figure emerged, a man in an old mill worker's coat, his skin gray like ash. His eyes burning with a dull red light. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure said, voice grinding like gears. "This is where the town is born. And where it must return." Elijah stumbled backward. "You killed them," he said. "You took their souls." The figure tilted its head. "They gave themselves. Every town has its cost." The wheel began to turn faster. The air filled with the sound of moaning metal and distant screams. The floor shook beneath him. Elijah ran toward the stairs, but the figure's arm shot out, grabbing his shoulder. Fire burned through his body. He saw flashes, people working, dying, vanishing into the machine, his father's face, his mother crying, the town being built over bones. Then suddenly, the grip loosened. Elijah turned and swung the iron key like a knife. It drove into the figure's chest. A scream tore through the chamber. The walls shook. The faces in the wheel began to glow, one by one. The figure staggered backward, light spilling from his body. Elijah climbed the stairs as the chamber began to collapse. The sound was deafening. When he reached the surface, the mill burst into flames behind him. The sky turned crimson, and the earth shook as if something massive was dying beneath it. He fell to his knees, gasping, watching the fire consume the mill that had haunted his family for generations. Then, through the smoke, he saw figures, dozens of them, walking out of the burning structure. Pale, quiet, faces calm. The trapped souls, finally free. Martha's voice echoed faintly in his mind. Every promise must end when courage takes its place. Elijah closed his eyes. The fire faded. The night grew still again. But in the distance, far below the earth, he thought he heard one last whisper, soft and cold. "It's not over. Would you like me to continue with part 7 next, in the same tone and simple YouTube storytelling style?" Got it. Here's part 7 of your historical horror story, written in simple English with an engaging hook, creepy atmosphere, and YouTube storytelling tone, continuing directly after the events of part 6. Part 7. The townspeople woke to the smell of smoke and ash. By morning, nothing was left of the old mill except a black skeleton of burnt beams and a river choked with ashes. Some called it an accident, others whispered it was God's punishment. But no one dared go near the ruins. Only Elijah knew what had really happened that night. He didn't speak of it. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces, those souls rising from the flames, silent and glowing, drifting into the mist like ghosts set free. For a while, the town grew quiet. The air felt lighter. Children laughed again. The church bell rang for the first time in months. But peace in this place never lasted long. 3 weeks after the fire, strange things began to happen again. Livestock were found dead, their eyes wide open as if they'd seen something terrible. Wells filled with dark water. People claimed to hear knocking under their floors at night. Elijah tried to ignore it. He worked to rebuild his father's small workshop, trying to live as if nothing had changed. But the past had a way of following him. One night, while repairing a roof, he noticed smoke rising again, from the direction of the ruins. He felt his chest tighten. No one had gone near the mill since that night. Slowly, he walked toward it, the moonlight casting long shadows across the charred ground. As he reached the hill, he stopped. Someone had built a wooden cross where the mill once stood. Fresh flowers lay at its base. But what froze Elijah's blood wasn't the cross, it was the sound. A faint creaking, like a wheel turning somewhere deep underground. The mill was gone, but the heart was still beating. Elijah ran to Martha Greer's cabin. She opened the door before he even knocked. "I told you it never ends," she said softly. "I destroyed it," Elijah said. "I saw it burn." She shook her head. "You burned the shell, boy. Not the spirit. It's older than the town. Older than us all. It feeds on fear, and fear still lives here." Elijah swallowed hard. "Then how do I stop it for good?" Martha turned toward her fireplace, tossing in a handful of white powder that made the flames turn blue. "There's one way," she said. "You must return what was taken. The first offering, the one that started it all." "I don't understand." She reached for a box under her bed. Inside was an old ledger, its pages yellow and brittle. She opened to the first entry. The ink was faded but still readable. June 12, 1829. Signed by Reverend Caleb Turner. One soul given for prosperity. Elijah frowned. Reverend Turner. The first preacher. Martha nodded. The founder of the town. He was no preacher, not really. He made a pact. He offered his own daughter to the spirit beneath the mill. Elijah's stomach turned. And that's what began the curse. "Yes," she said. "Her spirit is the first and last key. Until she is freed, the town will always belong to the darkness." He closed the ledger slowly. "Where is she buried?" Martha hesitated. "Not buried. Trapped. Beneath the church." Elijah felt the ground sway beneath him. The church stood in the center of town, its white steeple piercing the sky like a knife. It was where every family prayed for safety, never knowing they were kneeling over a grave. That night, Elijah walked toward the church. The doors creaked open as if expecting him. Candles flickered though no one was inside. The scent of old wax and damp stone filled the air. He moved down the aisle, past the pews, to the altar. Behind it, he found a small iron door hidden behind a cloth curtain. He knelt and pressed his ear to it. Faintly, he could hear something, a soft humming, almost like a lullaby. He pushed the door open. A staircase spiraled downward, cold and wet. The deeper he went, the stronger the humming became. At the bottom, he reached a small chamber lit by a single candle. In the center stood a coffin made of black wood. On its lid were words carved deep, "For the daughter of the promise." Elijah reached out, trembling. When his fingers touched the coffin, the humming stopped. The air grew still. Then a whisper came, gentle but cold. "You shouldn't have come here." He spun around, but no one was there. The shadows moved like liquid. The candle flickered and went out. Then he saw her. A young woman in a white dress stood in the darkness, her hair floating as if underwater. Her eyes glowed faint blue, her expression calm yet sorrowful. "Elijah Craven," she said softly. "You freed the others. But not me." He stepped back. "You're her. Reverend Turner's daughter." She nodded. "He gave me to the mill. My soul has kept it alive all these years. Then I'll set you free," Elijah said. Her face darkened. "You can't. I am bound by the promise. Break it, and the town dies with me." He hesitated. "Then what do I do?" She looked toward the ceiling, as if hearing the heartbeat of the land. "You must choose," she whispered. "Save the town, or save your soul." The ground began to shake. The church bells above rang wildly. Cracks spread through the stone walls. The coffin split open, light pouring out so bright it blinded him. Elijah covered his eyes. The voice echoed all around him. "Decide before dawn, or all will be lost." And then, silence. When he opened his eyes, he was lying in the middle of the church floor. The morning light streamed through the windows. The iron door was gone. So was the staircase. But the cross outside the ruins of the mill was burning again, this time with blue fire. Would you like me to continue with part 8 next in the same simple and gripping YouTube horror style? Absolutely. Here's part 8 of your historical horror story, written in simple, gripping English, with an engaging hook and YouTube storytelling tone for an American audience. Part 8. The town had begun to whisper again. Doors stayed closed, and shadows seemed to move when no one was looking. No one admitted why, but but even the bravest men avoided the mill ruins. The blue flames on the cross burned through the night, strange and cold, as if daring anyone to come closer. Elijah couldn't stop thinking about the girl in the coffin. Reverend Turner's daughter. He had glimpsed her spirit, heard her warning, and felt the weight of the choice she had placed on his shoulders. The town was alive, and it was hungry. The hunger would not end until the first offering was returned or replaced. He walked the streets cautiously, noting that the animals avoided him, that cats hissed from rooftops. Every now and then, a faint moan seemed to drift from the direction of the mill. The ruins were nothing more than blackened beams now, yet something inside insisted it was still alive. Something waiting. Elijah decided he had to speak with Martha Greer again. She was the only person who understood the history, who had seen what had happened through generations. When he arrived at her cabin, he found her sitting outside, staring at the stars as if she were counting them one by one. "You've come," she said without looking up. Her voice carried the weight of ages. "I have to finish this," Elijah said. "I can't leave it unfinished. Not after what I've seen." Martha nodded slowly. "Few have ever survived the first step, Elijah. To face the spirit of the first offering is to face the town itself. You will see what no one else has seen. You will walk in the shadow of history." "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. "You must go to the old family estates," she said. "The ones who built the mill. You will need items tied to the original pact. Only then can the first offering's spirit be freed. But beware, the estates are guarded, not by men, but by what they left behind. Their curse, their fear, and their unfulfilled promises." Elijah set out the next morning. The journey was long and treacherous. He rode through forests that felt alive, trees twisting as though watching him. Streams ran black in the moonlight, though the sun had risen hours ago. Occasionally, he glimpsed figures in the distance, shapes that disappeared when he approached. By evening, he reached the first estate, crumbling and overgrown. Its walls were moss-covered, and the windows gaped like empty eyes. The front gate creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and decay, mixed with something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in the sun. Elijah found the study, the family papers scattered across the floor. He picked through the documents carefully. Letters, deeds, and journals recorded transactions and property, but also strange entries about offerings, bloodlines, and promises made in shadows. One journal caught his attention. The handwriting was deliberate, elegant, but the words chilled him to the bone. "The offering ensures prosperity. Should the first fail, the town suffers. Fear is the bond. Fear is the law." Elijah understood now. The town's success, its very survival, depended on the spirit trapped beneath the church. It was the cost of greed, of pride, of promises made in desperation. As night fell, the estate began to shift. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. A cold wind blew through broken windows, carrying voices. Some whispered, others screamed. Elijah felt hands brush against his arms though no one was there. He knew the estate itself was alive with the echoes of those who had suffered to maintain the pact. He found a small box hidden in the floorboards. Inside were relics. A small silver locket, a ring, a fragment of cloth yellowed with age. Each item hummed faintly, a pulse that matched the pounding of his heart. He realized these were tied to the daughter, to the original offering. This was what he needed to set her free. Carrying the items, Elijah returned to the church, each step heavier than the last. The streets were empty, the town seemingly asleep, but he felt eyes on him at every corner. He entered the church quietly. The air was thick and still, as if the building itself was holding its breath. He moved to where the hidden door had once been. To his surprise, it had reappeared. The staircase spiraled down into darkness. The air smelled of damp stone and ancient incense. He descended, holding the relics tightly. At the bottom, the chamber had changed. The coffin was gone, replaced by a shallow pit. Faint blue light glowed from its center. Elijah laid the items carefully inside. The light brightened, illuminating the walls. For the first time, he saw the walls lined with carvings, faces of the trapped souls, not screaming this time, but calm. A voice echoed around him, soft, gentle, and sad. You have brought them back. You have remembered. The blue light swirled into a column, rising toward the ceiling, carrying the relics. Elijah felt warmth, hope, and sorrow all at once. He realized the spirit of the first offering was returning to the earth, to rest finally after centuries of being bound. Then the ground shook violently. The walls trembled. Shadows twisted like living things, resisting the release. Elijah stood firm, chanting the names of the trapped souls, repeating the words Martha had taught him. Light and shadow battled across the chamber, wind and whispers rising in a crescendo. And then, suddenly, silence. When Elijah opened his eyes, the chamber was empty. The blue light was gone. The relics had dissolved into dust. The air was still, clean. He knew the spirit had been freed. He emerged from the church into dawn. The town seemed different, lighter. Birds sang. The river sparkled in the sun. People stepped outside, blinking, as if waking from a long nightmare. Elijah knew the danger was not entirely gone. Shadows remembered, and fear could return. But the first offering had been freed. The mill's hunger had been broken, for now. And for the first time in years, Elijah felt the weight of hope. If you want, I can now write Part 9, building toward the story's final climax and resolution in Part 10, keeping it suspenseful and YouTube-friendly. Do you want me to continue with Part 9 next? Absolutely. Here's Part 9 of your historical horror story, written in simple, gripping English, with an engaging hook and YouTube storytelling tone for an American audience. This part builds tension toward the final climax in Part 10. Part 9. The air felt different in town after that dawn. Lighter, yes, but also, watchful. People whispered that the curse had been broken, that the old mill's hunger had ended. But Elijah knew better. Shadows lingered where the blue flames had burned, and the river's whisper carried secrets he could not yet understand. He returned to his small cabin at the edge of town, hoping for rest. Yet sleep refused him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the daughter's face, calm but haunted, as if warning him that freedom had a price. The next morning, Elijah visited Martha Greer. She was tending her garden, hands covered in soil, humming softly. She looked up at him, her face grave. "They are moving," she said without preamble. "Who?" Elijah asked. "The shadows. The ones that feed on fear. They've lost their anchor, but they haven't vanished. They are restless. Some will try to rebuild the mill, some will search for new ways to bind the town. You freed the first offering, but the old family's secrets are still here. They never leave entirely." Elijah nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The fight wasn't over. The curse was fractured, but not destroyed. And now, it was looking for a new host. He walked through the streets, observing the townspeople. Children played near the river, laughing. Farmers tended fields, unaware that the ground beneath their feet still held echoes of the past. Some doors were slightly ajar, as if waiting for someone, or something, to enter. Then he saw it. At the edge of town, near the old mill ruins, a figure stood in the morning fog. Tall, cloaked in shadow, with eyes that glowed faintly blue. Elijah's heart froze. He approached cautiously. "Who are you?" he called. The figure stepped forward. The light revealed the shape of a man, but his face was unfamiliar, too sharp, too hollow. "I am what remains," the voice said. "I am what you freed, yet did not destroy. I am the hunger, the fear, the part they could not bind." Elijah felt the air grow cold. His hands shook. "What do you want?" "To continue," the figure said. "To teach the town the cost of promises. You freed her, but the debt remains. Another must pay, or the shadows will rise again." Elijah's mind raced. He remembered the relics, the coffin, the blue light. He had thought it was finished. "Then what do I do?" he asked. "You must end it fully," the figure whispered. "You must confront the source." Elijah realized with horror that the spirit beneath the church had not vanished entirely. It had only moved, seeking a new connection. The shadows would not rest until the debt was repaid completely. He returned to Martha's cabin. "It's not over," he said. Martha nodded. "You knew it would not be. The first offering was only the beginning. The mill was built on greed, cruelty, and blood. To end it, you must confront the original sin, the one no ledger or journal ever recorded." Elijah felt a chill run down his spine. He had spent years chasing shadows, memorizing journals, piecing together history. But now he understood that history alone would not save the town. He had to face the darkness directly. That night, he prepared. He gathered tools, books, and protective charms Martha had given him, all items said to guard against restless spirits. He lit a single lantern and left his cabin, walking toward the church. The streets were empty. Windows were dark. The river ran silently beside him, carrying the memory of every lost soul. When he reached the church, the doors opened as if by their own will. The hidden staircase appeared again, spiraling downward into the unknown. Elijah descended, each step echoing in the stone corridor. At the bottom, the chamber had changed once more. Shadows moved along the walls, twisting, coiling, reaching. The blue light flickered weakly in the center. He stepped forward, holding the relics from the old estate, now cleansed and ready. "I am here to finish this," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clenching his chest. From the darkness, the figure emerged, hollow eyes, sharp features, the embodiment of hunger itself. "You cannot stop me," it hissed. "I am what greed created. I am what fear sustains. And now, you will join the others." Elijah remembered Martha's words. He lifted the relics and recited the incantation she had taught him, calling the names of every soul trapped in the mill, the church, and the town. The blue light grew, surrounding him, pulsing with warmth and energy. The shadows shrieked and writhed, trying to reach him. The walls trembled, stone cracking. But Elijah did not falter. He pressed the relics to the ground, chanting louder. Light exploded from the relics, engulfing the chamber. The shadows screamed, then shrank, twisting into themselves, dissolving like smoke in wind. The hunger, the fear, the centuries of pain, they all seemed to collapse inward. When the light faded, Elijah was alone. The chamber was empty, quiet. The blue glow had vanished, leaving only faint traces of warmth in the stone. He emerged into dawn again. The town was still, but peaceful. Birds sang. The river sparkled. Windows reflected sunlight rather than shadows. He knew the town was free, finally. Yet he carried the weight of what he had seen. The ledger of suffering, the ghosts, the spirits, they were gone from the world, but Elijah could never forget. He was the witness now, the one who could tell the truth. As he walked toward his cabin, he saw the ruins of the mill. For the first time, it looked lifeless. No blue flames, no shadowy figures, only charred wood, blackened and silent. Elijah understood one thing clearly: some histories cannot be erased. Some horrors cannot be ignored. But some, with courage and truth, can be ended. He vowed that he would record everything, for the town, for the lost, for the generations to come. And he knew, deep down, that he would not be alone. The spirits of the first offering, and all those who had suffered, now rested. The dawn light touched his face, and he breathed deeply. The battle was not just for survival, it was for memory, for justice, for truth. And in that quiet, Elijah knew the town had a chance to live in peace for the first time in over a century. If you want, I can now craft part 10, the final and most gripping conclusion, tying together all the horrors, the spirits, and Elijah's ultimate victory in a YouTube-ready horror style. Do you want me to create part 10 next? Absolutely. Here's part 10, the final part of your 10-part historical horror story, written in simple, gripping English, with an engaging hook, YouTube-friendly suspense, and a call to action at the end. Part 10, the final reckoning. Have you ever felt a place watching you? Not with eyes, not with faces, but with a weight that presses against your chest and whispers in your ears. That is what the town felt like when I returned to Riverside for the last time. The shadows had been broken, yes, but some things do not simply vanish. They wait. The morning was cold, the fog lingering over the James River like a thick curtain. The ruins of the old plantation and the mill lay silent, blackened beams reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. I walked slowly, my boots crunching on frost-hardened earth, and every step reminded me of the voices I had heard over the years. The voices of the lost. The ones who had vanished, whose graves had been hidden, whose suffering had been recorded in secret ledgers, now burned or memorized. I paused near the old slave quarters. 12 cabins, empty and decaying, each one holding memories I could still see with my mind's eye. I remembered my mother praying in the night, Ruth's laughter, my father's steady hands, and Augustus' calm determination. Their stories, their lives, had been twisted by the cruelty of one man. And now it was time to face the truth of what had been done. The first blue flame appeared suddenly, low to the ground, cold and flickering. My heart raced. Shadows gathered around it, stretching and twisting like living smoke. They were smaller than before, weaker, but restless, still hungry for fear. I held the relics tightly in my hands, the locket, the ring, and the fragment of cloth. They had guided me before, and I trusted them to guide me now. Enough, I whispered, stepping toward the center of the clearing. It ends today. The shadows surged, coiling around my feet, whispering threats and accusations. The air was thick, the wind carrying voices from centuries past. Then a voice rang above them all, clear and cold, the spirit of the first offering, now fully awake. You have returned, it said. Do you understand the cost? I do, I answered. I have seen the suffering. I have learned the truths. And I will make it right. The shadows writhed violently, resisting, but I placed the relics in the center of the clearing, forming a triangle. I called aloud the names of every soul trapped in Riverside, the mill, and the town itself. I spoke of their pain, their fear, their stolen lives, their testimonies that had been silenced. Light exploded from the relics, brighter than the sun, cutting through the fog and the darkness. The shadows screamed, twisting in impossible shapes, reaching for me, but they could not touch me. The first offering rose from the ground, a pale figure of calm and sorrow, its eyes filled with centuries of longing. It hovered above the relics, and for the first time, the blue flame expanded into a brilliant, pure light. Then the ground shook, violently. The earth cracked around the old foundations of the mill, swallowing the remnants of charred beams and broken stone. The shadows were drawn toward the light, pulled into the relics, consumed by the power of memory and truth. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then silence. I opened my eyes. The clearing was empty. No shadows, no flames, only sunlight breaking through the trees. The river sparkled as it flowed quietly, unaware of what had just been set free. The town beyond the river seemed different too. Lighter, calmer, as if a centuries-long weight had been lifted. I knew the spirits of Riverside had finally found rest. The lost, the disappeared, the forgotten, they were free. Augustus' legacy, my parents' pain, Ruth's memory, all of it had been acknowledged and returned to the earth. I walked through the town, noting the small details that had changed. Birds sang more boldly, windows reflected the sun instead of shadows. Children played freely, and in every face, I saw relief, though none could know why. The horrors of Riverside were gone, but the lesson remained. History could not be erased, the suffering could not be ignored, and the truth had to be remembered. My voice was the last link, the final testimony. And I vowed to keep it alive, to tell the story so that no one would forget the cost of cruelty and the power of courage. If you are listening to this account, remember that the past is not dead. It lives in memory, in the land, and in the echoes of those who suffered. Witness it, acknowledge it, and learn from it. And now, the story ends, but the memory continues. If you want to know more, if you want to uncover the hidden stories of history, subscribe to this channel. Share this story with those who need to hear it. Leave a comment below with where you're from, and remember the voices that history tried to silence. The dead have given their testimony. It is now ours to remember.